Welcome to my channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world.
What if I told you that between 2 and 4 in the morning, the rules change on the Pacific Coast Highway? Not just the speed limits, not just the traffic laws, everything. And if you break them, you don't get a ticket, you get something far worse. The story is about to begin. I've driven highway one more times than I can count. The Pacific Coast Highway isn't just a road for me, it's a lifeline. Every Monday through Friday, I make the drive from my apartment in Ventura down to my office in Oxnard, 40 minutes on a good day, 55 when the fog rolls in thick. I know every curve, every overpass, the way the guardrails catch the sunrise at mile marker 47, the old abandoned gas station near County Line Road with the rusted sign still advertising unleaded for 1009. I even know which lanes have potholes. The ones that'll rattle your teeth if you hit them too fast. Driving the same route day after day does something to your mind. It hypnotizes you, makes you feel like you're the only person on the road, like the world ends at the shoulder line and begins again at the next exit. But that Tuesday in October changed everything. I'd been working late, stayed at the office past midnight finishing a presentation. The drive down wasn't unusual, maybe 3 other cars on the highway. The moon was almost full, just slightly off from perfect. The kind of imperfection that catches your eye even when you're exhausted. I remember thinking how pretty it looked reflecting off the water. I was about 20 minutes into my drive when I noticed something odd. The signs. I'd never seen them before, and I know I had. I know this road. But there they were. Small green reflective plaques on the guardrails, white text, except I couldn't read them properly, not while driving. Every time I tried to focus, they seemed to shift, like they were written in a language I almost understood but kept forgetting mid-sentence. I told myself I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks, that my clock did something it had never done before. The digital display on my dashboard, the one that always showed the time in perfect accuracy. It started counting backward. 12:47 a.m. became 12:46, then 12:45, slow, deliberate. Like each second was being carefully withdrawn from the night. I pulled over. My hands felt cold, colder than they should have in the mild California autumn. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, watching the clock go backward, and then it stopped. And then it stopped. Froze on 2002 a.m. I pressed the brake, checked the time on my phone, 2004 a.m. My dashboard was still showing 2002. I told myself there was a simple explanation, a glitch, a battery issue. I'd get it fixed this weekend. I pulled back onto the highway and kept driving, but something had shifted. The air inside my car felt thinner. The darkness outside felt purposeful, like it was watching me. That's when I saw the car. It was parked on the shoulder ahead, maybe a quarter mile up the road, a burgundy sedan, 1980s maybe, the kind of car that shouldn't exist anymore. And it was perfectly still, engine off, no lights, just waiting. As I got closer, I could make out a figure in the driver's seat, a man, just sitting there, hands on the wheel, staring forward, staring directly ahead at nothing. I didn't stop. I drove past carefully. Watched him in my mirror. He didn't turn, didn't move, didn't acknowledge me at all. And when I finally looked away, my dashboard clock was displaying a time I knew couldn't be right, 2:23 a.m. Only 3 minutes had passed since I'd first noticed the clock was broken. I made it home that night without any other incidents. I parked in my apartment complex, went inside, made myself a cup of tea because sleep felt impossible. I sat in the dark, laptop open on my kitchen counter, searching for explanations, time glitches in cars. Paranormal activity on Pacific Coast Highway, true stories, documented cases, urban legends, creepypasta forums, Reddit threads in the deep subreddits where people discuss things that don't have explanations. Nothing concrete, just forums filled with people claiming they'd seen things, felt things. Experienced missing time, but there were no official reports, no news articles, no evidence that any of it was real. The posts would get buried, comments would disappear, some accounts would be deleted entirely as if they'd never existed at all. I found one thread titled, "The 2 a.m. Drivers," posted on an obscure paranormal forum. The original post had been made 3 years ago by someone calling themselves Night Commuter 47. They described almost exactly what I'd experienced, the backward clock, the green signs, the rules, the strange vehicles operating according to physics that didn't quite fit. But their post ended with a warning, a single sentence that made my blood run cold. If you see the man in the burgundy sedan a second time, you're already too deep. There's no turning back after that. I checked the timestamp. The post was from 2019. Nobody had commented on it since 2020, and when I tried to click on the user's profile to see their other posts, The account showed deleted or suspended. I told myself it was coincidence, tired eyes, a faulty dashboard clock. But the next night, I had to drive home again. I left the office at 12:45 a.m. Earlier than usual. I wanted to get the drive done while I was still alert, still in control. I pulled onto Highway 1 around 100 a.m. The road was empty. The fog was heavier tonight, pressing against my windshield. Thick enough that the headlights seemed almost useless. Around 1:47 a.m. I passed a diner. Not a famous one, not a place that serves breakfast all night and has neon signs reflecting off the parking lot. This was different. Small, forgotten. The kind of place that most people miss because they're looking at their phones or thinking about work. The windows were dark, but I could see a faint light in the back and a figure standing behind the counter. Just standing there, waiting for customers who would never come. I almost didn't slow down, almost didn't pay attention. But something made me look. That's when I saw the sign above the door. Open 2000 a.m., 4000 a.m. only. I kept driving. I don't know why that sign bothered me more than the broken clock or the abandoned car from the night before. But it did. It meant someone had written those hours down deliberately, posted them for a reason. It meant the 2 to 4 a.m. window wasn't just something I'd imagined. It meant something was happening. My phone started buzzing around 1:55 a.m. An email notification from someone I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You're driving the right road at the right time. Do you know the rules?" I didn't open the email. My hands started shaking. I pulled over at a rest stop, looked at my phone in the harsh parking lot lights. The email was still there. The sender's address was just a string of numbers, 340-47-1928-47-mail.com or something similar. I can't remember exactly, not anymore. I deleted it. Then I turned on the local news on my phone, scrolled through my social media, tried to convince myself that this was some kind of prank. Someone spoofing an email address. A coincidence about the diner's hours, at 1:59 a.m. I got back on the highway. That's when I finally saw them clearly. The green reflective plaques on the guardrails, the ones I'd glimpsed the night before. I slowed down this time, focused on reading them. Rule 1, don't acknowledge the other drivers. Rule 2, don't look in the mirrors for too long. Rule 3, your odometer tells a different truth. Rule 4, the speed limit isn't about miles. Rule 5, exit signs only appear once. My brain struggled to process what I was reading. These weren't standard road signs. These weren't warning about potholes or construction. These were instructions. Guidelines for something happening on this specific stretch of highway between specific hours. Between 2 and 4 a.m. I checked my dashboard clock again. 2001 a.m. Around me. Instruction. The fog seemed to press in tighter. The highway suddenly felt narrower. And that's when I realized there were other cars. Cars I hadn't noticed before, driving in the opposite direction, or the same direction. I couldn't quite tell anymore. Their headlights had a strange quality to them. Too bright and too dim at the same time. I counted 7 cars, then 8. Then I stopped counting because that Rule 1 kept echoing in my head. Don't acknowledge the other drivers. So I didn't. I focused on the road ahead, on my steering wheel, on the white lines that seemed thinner than usual. I felt their presence, though. The other drivers, felt them watching me, felt their cars operating according to physics that didn't quite match the reality I understood. One of them, a black truck directly in the lane beside me, started matching my speed exactly, not faster, not slower. Perfect synchronization. I wanted to look, wanted to see the driver's face. But Rule 1 echoed again. I kept my eyes forward, at 2:12 a.m. I noticed something else. The scenery wasn't changing. I was passing the same landmarks repeatedly. The lighthouse at Pierpont Beach. The rocky outcropping at Hobson Beach, the way the guardrail curves near Rincon Point, all of it looping back, but my odometer kept increasing. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. Your odometer tells a different truth. I was traveling distance that didn't correspond to any actual movement. My car was somehow covering ground that didn't exist, or more accurately, the ground was being covered but not in the normal way, not in the way a straight line from point A to point B should work. The black truck was still beside me. I could feel its presence without looking. The vibration of its engine, the slight pressure of its weight on the road. It was waiting for something, or watching, maybe both. I started sweating even though my air conditioning was set to cool. Then, at 2:24 a.m., I made a decision. I broke Rule 2. I looked in the mirror, not for long. Just a glance, but it was enough. In the back seat of my car, there was something, a shape, darker than the darkness around it. Humanoid, but not quite right. The proportions were off. The head was too large, the limbs too thin, and it was looking directly at me, not at my face specifically. but at me, at the back of my head, observing. I jerked my attention forward immediately. My heart was hammering. My breath came in short gasps. I wanted to scream, wanted to pull over and throw open the doors. But Rule 1 was still there, and Rule 2 was already broken. I couldn't break Rule 1 too. The shape in the back seat didn't move, didn't lean forward, didn't try to touch me. It just observed, studied me the way a scientist studies bacteria under a microscope, curious but not particularly invested in the outcome. I drove faster, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight I thought it might snap. The black truck accelerated too, maintaining perfect distance. The other cars on the road seemed to be moving in a pattern now, a strange choreography that made sense only to them. The diner appeared again at 2:31 a.m. But something was different this time. The lights in the back weren't as dim. I could see through the window more clearly. The counter was filled with people, dozens of them, all eating, all moving in sync, all maintaining the same posture. Their movements were mirror images of each other. Identical, choreographed, and when they turned their heads, all at once, they looked directly at my car. They smiled. I started taking notes on my phone at 2:35 a.m. Started documenting things because I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Small details. The way the pavement sounded different under my tires. The fact that all the other cars on the road seemed to maintain a consistent distance from me, like they were orbiting around something invisible I couldn't see. I typed, "The speed limit signs now read appropriate velocity as determined by intention." I typed, "The mile markers are counting down instead of up." I typed, "I've passed the same exit sign 4 times." I typed, "There's something in my back seat. I can't look at it. If I do, I think it will know I'm aware." Then, at 2:39 a.m., I saw it, the burgundy sedan from 2 nights ago, but now it was directly in front of me, driving at exactly the speed limit, exactly. The man in the driver's seat had his head turned slightly, not enough to see his face. But I could see the curve of his jaw, the profile. He was waiting for me to get close enough. The thing in my back seat seemed to lean forward slightly. I could feel the shift in air pressure. The temperature in my car dropped about 10 degrees. Frost started forming on my windshield from the inside. I kept my eyes forward, refused to acknowledge any of it. The shape in the back seat emitted a sound, not words, not quite, but something between a whisper and a frequency too low for human ears. A vibration that made my teeth ache and my bones feel like they were vibrating in different directions simultaneously. The burgundy sedan started braking, slowly, deliberately. It was trying to force me to hit it, or to swerve. Either action would break Rule 1 or Rule 2, or some rule I hadn't discovered yet. I maintained my speed. The truck to my right matched it. The other cars around me all seemed to tighten their formation. The space between us became infinitesimal, like we were all part of something larger. Something moving as a single organism through this strange version of Highway 1 that existed only between 2 and 4 a.m. At 2:42 a.m., the burgundy sedan suddenly accelerated away. It pulled ahead of me. The driver's head turned for just a moment. I caught the briefest glimpse of his face. It was the same face, the exact same face, as in my mirror. The thing in my backseat had a human face, and it matched the driver of the burgundy sedan exactly. My vision went white for a moment. My car swerved. My hands fought the steering wheel, but I corrected. I stayed in my lane. I didn't break Rule 1. The black truck continued beside me. At 2:47 a.m., everything started to shift. The fog lifted, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had switched off the generator powering it. The other cars started disappearing, one by one, peeling off at exits that didn't exist on any map I'd ever seen. By 2:55 a.m., I was alone, completely alone on the highway. The green reflective plaques had all disappeared too. The frost on my windshield melted instantly. My dashboard clock started moving forward again, tick by tick. 2:55 became 2:56, became 2:57, became 3000 a.m., and slowly, things started feeling normal again. But the thing in my back seat didn't leave at 4 a.m. I made it home at 3:15 a.m. and sat in my car for 30 minutes before looking in the mirror. It was gone, completely gone. Before ahem, or there was no trace of it ever existing. The back seat was empty, the smell in the car, a strange metallic scent I hadn't consciously noticed until it disappeared, was gone, but I could still feel it. Not physically, but like a memory that didn't quite fit, an echo of something that had been present. A knowledge that it had studied me thoroughly, completely, intimately. I started researching more intensely. I contacted former coworkers who'd mentioned driving late at night. One of them, a woman named Sarah, went very quiet when I asked her about the hours between 2 and 4 a.m. on Highway 1. She eventually told me she'd experienced something similar but didn't want to talk about it over the phone. We met for coffee at an all-night diner in Ojai. Sarah explained that she'd driven the highway late one night about a year ago. She'd experienced the clock glitches, the strange cars, the green plaques with rules. But unlike me, she'd broken one of the rules. Multiple rules, actually. She looked in the mirror too long. She saw something in the back seat of her car, something that shouldn't have been there. She wouldn't describe it in detail, but she said it was watching her. And when she blinked, it moved slightly closer. "The rule isn't a punishment," Sarah said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's a safety mechanism. Those hours, they're not part of our time anymore. They're something else. Something that exists in the gaps between normal reality. And the rules exist to keep both sides separate." I asked her what she meant by both sides. She pushed a folder across the table toward me. Inside were printed articles, blog posts, Reddit threads, all from different people describing the same experience, all from different time periods, dating back decades. The oldest entry I could find was from 1987, a newspaper clipping from a California Gazette about a man who'd been found driving north on Highway 1 traveling south. Literally, his car was moving north, but he was sitting facing south. The article was vague about the details, but it mentioned that he kept repeating the same phrase, the rules, the rules, the rules. He'd been institutionalized, spent the rest of his life in a facility near San Luis Obispo. The 2 to 4 a.m. window, Sarah continued. It's not new, it's not something that started recently. People have been driving through it for a long time. Most of them don't remember it properly. Their brains reject the memories, label them as dreams or glitches. But some of us remember everything. I asked her why the things in the back seat looked like the drivers of other cars. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. Because they're the same being, the same consciousness, fractured across multiple drivers, multiple cars, it studies by dividing itself, by observing from multiple perspectives simultaneously. It's not malicious, I don't think, but it's not exactly benign either. It's just curious, very, very curious about human consciousness. Then she told me something that made everything worse. "You're going to notice something over the next few days," Sarah said. She pulled out her phone, showed me a calendar. "Every time you see a 2 a.m. on the clock, your heart will skip. Every time you glance at a mirror, you'll feel like something is just out of frame, waiting. The entity doesn't need to be physically present to observe anymore. Once it's studied you, it can monitor you from a distance, through time itself." I asked her how long it lasted. For me? 6 months. For others in the folder? Years. There was one woman. Her name was Margaret. She drove Highway 1 in 1993. She wrote journals, detailed accounts of how the presence followed her everywhere, how it whispered to her at 2 a.m. each night, how it slowly taught her to understand its language. The journals stop abruptly in 2001. Last entry just says, "I finally understand now. I'm ready to answer its questions." "What happened to her?" I asked. Sarah closed the folder. She was found driving north on Highway 1 at 2:47 a.m. Going in circles. Just circles. Her car had been reported missing 3 days earlier from a parking lot in Fresno. She shouldn't have been able to drive there in that time. When they pulled her over, she told the officer that she'd been driving for her entire life, that she was finally home. They took her to a hospital, but she didn't speak for weeks. When she finally did, nobody understood what she was saying. It sounded like English, but the words were arranged wrong. The syntax was alien. I felt my coffee cup shake in my hands. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "I've been tracking the pattern, the appearances on highways, the spreading to other roads. I think it's building something, like it's creating a network, a web of consciousness spread across every highway in America, maybe the world. I think it's trying to map human civilization through our transportation systems, understanding how we move, where we go, how we think about journeys." She leaned across the table, her eyes locked with mine. "But here's what terrifies me most. The entity doesn't just study drivers. It studies passengers, people sleeping in the back seats, children in car seats. Everyone who travels during those hours becomes part of its observation data. It's been collecting information for decades, generations of travelers, and the more people who drive at night, the stronger it becomes." I asked her if she'd ever tried to avoid driving at all. "Yes," she said, "but it doesn't matter. I had a friend who refused to drive after 2 a.m. She hired a taxi service instead, hired other people to drive her during late hours. The taxi drivers all reported the same experience. The same entity, the same presence in the back seat. So I realized, it doesn't matter if you're behind the wheel or not. If you're traveling during those hours, you're already participating, already being observed. I never drove Highway 1 between 2 and 4 a.m. again. But something changed after that coffee meeting with Sarah. My apartment started feeling smaller. The walls seemed to close in at exactly 2 a.m. each night. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, even though my thermostat was set to 68 degrees. And my dreams, God. My dreams during those hours were vivid in a way that defied logic. I was driving, always driving, on roads that didn't exist, through cities that had the wrong architecture, past landscapes that were geometrically impossible, and in the back seat, always in the back seat. Something was taking notes, writing observations about me, recording data about my fears, my hopes, my deepest insecurities. I started keeping a dream journal. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and immediately write down everything I could remember. The journal filled up, dozens of pages, hundreds. And the more I wrote, the more I realized the dreams were getting more detailed, more specific. Like whatever was in my subconscious was learning to communicate more clearly. 3 weeks after meeting Sarah, I received a letter, not an email, a physical letter, delivered to my apartment by regular mail. The envelope was addressed in handwriting that looked almost like my own, almost, but slightly off, like it was written by someone who'd studied my handwriting for years but hadn't quite perfected it. Inside was a single page, dense text, handwritten. And it took me nearly an hour to realize what I was reading. It was a summary, a detailed account of every journey I'd ever taken, every car I'd ever owned, every highway, every route, every passenger who'd ever ridden with me. The document went back to my childhood. It described a road trip with my parents when I was 7 years old, a drive through Nevada that I'd almost completely forgotten about. But the entity hadn't forgotten. It had been there, observing, recording, taking notes. The letter ended with a single message. Handwritten in that almost familiar script, "We have been watching the roads you travel. We understand your patterns. We see your destinations. We know why you drive at certain hours and avoid others. You are becoming clearer to us each night. Soon, you will become clear enough to understand what we are asking, what we have always been asking. The question you ask at 2 a.m. when nobody is listening, we will have the answer." I burned the letter immediately, but I still remember every word. Here's what haunts me most now, months later. Last week, I noticed the green reflective plaques had appeared on regular roads nowhere near the coast, simple roads in residential areas, the same rules, written on guardrails in suburbs across California, Arizona, Nevada, Texas. They're spreading. And I've started noticing something else. When I'm out driving after 2 a.m. on any highway, the other cars have a quality about them, a deliberateness, like their drivers know something I don't, like they're all following the same rules. I downloaded a map application and started tracking reported missing time incidents across the country. The data was sparse. People don't report things that don't make sense to them, but the pattern was undeniable. Every major highway in America has sections where time is reported as moving differently during the 2 to 4 a.m. window. Route 66, Interstate 95, Highway 61, the Palisades Interstate Parkway, Pacific Coast Highway, all of them, each one with its own stories, its own folklore. Its own rules that differ slightly from one highway to the next, but follow the same basic structure. Don't acknowledge, don't look, don't trust your instruments. And last night, something new happened. I received an email at 2:47 a.m. from the same mysterious sender who'd contacted me before. The subject line was simple: "It knows your name now." The body of the email contained a single sentence: "It will be looking for you on every road, every night, until 2 a.m. comes again." I haven't driven since, but my apartment is on the 5th floor. And last night, I looked out my window at 2:30 a.m. The cars on the street below, every single one of them, had the burgundy sedan sitting in front of it. Not literally, but that's what I saw. That's what I can only describe as what I saw. The same shape, the same form, multiplied, fractal-like, existing in my peripheral vision just slightly off from normal sight. They're all waiting, tonight. If you drive after 2 a.m. on any highway, pay attention to the signs, really look at them, because I have a feeling you might see the green plaques too. And once you do, you'll understand why I'm telling you this, why I need someone to know, someone to understand what those hours really are. Because here's what I've realized: the being in the back seat, the consciousness that divides itself among drivers, it's not new, it's ancient. It's been riding these highways since the first roads were paved. It studies us, documents us, learns from us, and it's patient. It doesn't hunt, it doesn't need to. It just waits, observes, takes notes, until the day it's gathered enough information, until the day it understands us completely. And then, the rules will change. What would you do if you saw those green plaques? Would you follow the rules, or would you break them? Comment below and tell me, have you ever experienced lost time on a late-night drive? Have you noticed anything strange between 2 and 4 a.m.? Have you seen the same car more than once? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because next week, I'm revealing something I discovered in Sarah's folder, something that changes everything we think we know about Highway 1. Share this with someone who drives late at night. They need to know the rules before they encounter them. But maybe they already have. Maybe you're watching this at 2:47 a.m. right now. Maybe you recognize these events. Maybe you're one of them. I'll see you at 2 a.m. I'll see you there. Story number 2. Picture this. You're drifting through dark water. The moon above isn't white anymore. It's red, bleeding red, and you're going the wrong way. But here's the thing, you don't realize it yet. None of us did. Story begins no. The bayou at dusk smells like wet earth and old secrets. I know that now, but 3 months ago, when I first steered my airboat into those waters, I thought it smelled like adventure. My name's Marcus. I'm a tour guide. Been doing this for 12 years out of New Orleans. Taking tourists through the Louisiana wetlands, pointing out cypress trees and alligators, making people feel like they'd touched something wild and untamed before heading back to their hotels. It's honest work. Predictable. Safe. But that safety was a lie. The kind you don't recognize until it's too late. It was October 15th. I remember the exact date because that's when the old woman at the dock said something that stuck with me. I was prepping my boat, checking the fuel and the emergency supplies like I always do when she walked past. Had to be at least 85, moving slow, her skin weathered like driftwood. She stopped, looked at my boat, then looked at me. Not tonight, she said. Just those 2 words. I laughed it off. Tourists were always saying weird things. That's what I thought she was. Another lost tourist. But her eyes. God, her eyes were clear. Clearer than mine. She wasn't confused about anything. Excuse me? I asked. She didn't repeat herself. Just shook her head and walked on. Disappeared into the dockhouse like she'd never been there. I should have listened. That evening, a group of 8 people showed up for the late tour. Unusual, but were flexible. They were from a film production company out of Atlanta, making a documentary about Louisiana culture, they said. They wanted the authentic experience, the sunset tour, the one where you really feel the bayou settle into its night rhythm. I pulled away from the dock around 6:15 p.m. The sun was starting its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful, perfect actually. The water was calm, no wind. The usual evening sounds were present, birds settling, insects starting their chorus. Everything was normal. The group sat in the comfortable observation seats. I stood at the helm, piloting the boat through the channels I'd memorized years ago, left at the cypress cluster. Straight through the open water, right toward the old shack, the abandoned fishing cabin that tourists always wanted photos of. But about 20 minutes into the tour, something felt different. The water had changed color, not dramatically, just slightly. Normally it's dark brown. Almost black in the evening, but now it had this subtle olive tint to it, like the bottom was reflecting light differently. I told myself I was imagining things. "Everything okay up there?" called one of the documentarians. A woman named Sarah with a camera around her neck. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I said. "Just adjusting our route slightly. You'll love where we're headed." But I hadn't adjusted our route. That was a lie, and I knew it immediately after I said it. The truth was, I wasn't entirely sure where we were. That shouldn't have been possible. I'd run these channels hundreds of times. Every bend, every cypress cluster, every shallowed section, I could navigate them half asleep. But now, the landmarks weren't lining up quite right. The cabin should have appeared around the next turn. It didn't. I kept the boat steady. Didn't let the uncertainty show in my voice or my posture. That's a trick you learn as a guide. Maintain confidence even when confidence is crumbling internally. We passed a family of nutria, those big rodents that look vaguely prehistoric. They didn't react to the boat like they usually do. They just stared. All of them, 4 of them. Sitting perfectly still on a submerged log, their eyes followed us. "That's unusual," I heard one of the documentarians mutter. "They never hold still like that." I didn't respond, couldn't. My throat had gone dry. The sun had dropped lower now. Maybe 30 minutes of real light left. The sky was taking on that deep purple that comes right before true darkness. And the moon, God, the moon was rising. But it wasn't white. It was definitely red, not completely, more like bruised. Like someone had punched it, and the blood was pooling just beneath the surface. A blood moon, I'd seen them before. Lunar eclipse, happens a few times a year. Atmospheric refraction and all that. I knew the science. But knowing the science doesn't make it less unsettling when you see one in person. Hanging over water that's slowly getting darker and more olive green. In a place you suddenly realize you don't quite recognize. The panic comes later. That's important to understand. In the moment, you don't panic. You go quiet. You become very focused on small things, details. Like how the boat's engine sounds slightly different when the fuel mixture is off. or how your left hand is trembling on the wheel even though you keep telling it to stay still. I decided to turn the boat around. A simple decision. Just spin it back the way we came and retrace my steps. Get back to familiar territory. The tourists were chatting among themselves, not yet aware that anything was wrong. That was good. I wanted to keep it that way. I turned the wheel hard to the left. The boat didn't respond right away. That was strange. These airboats are sensitive. They turn quick. But this one, it took a moment, like it was resisting. Then it responded. And that's when I saw it, another boat, moving toward us from deeper in the bayou. No lights, no engine sound I could hear. It was just emerging from behind a cluster of cypress trees, like it was materializing from the darkness itself. It was an old cypress wood boat, the kind people built 50 years ago, the kind you might see in a museum, not moving through these waters on an October evening, and there was a man in it. He was tall, impossibly tall for a small boat like that, and his skin, I can see it clearly even now, even though it's been weeks, his skin was the same olive green color as the water. Folks, stay calm, I heard myself say. My voice sounded strange, higher pitched, nervous. But then the boat, the cypress wood boat, just stopped. It didn't slow down, it just ceased movement, like someone had pressed pause on existence, and the man, he tilted his head, looked directly at me. His eyes were black, completely black, no iris, no pupil. Just black where eyes should be. He opened his mouth, and I heard something, not with my ears, somewhere deeper, in my chest, in my bones. A voice that wasn't a voice, words that weren't words, but I understood them perfectly. You took a wrong turn. I looked back at my tourists. They weren't seeing this. I could tell. They were looking at their cameras, their phones, pointing at the blood moon, completely oblivious to the cypress boat, the tall man, the impossible stillness of the water around it. It's a private tour group, I said out loud. Must be lost. Sarah turned to me. Did you say something? Just narrating, I said. The lie felt thick in my mouth. I started the boat forward again, but I didn't turn back toward the dock. I couldn't. Something was wrong with my thinking, my direction. It was like my internal compass had been scrambled. We drifted deeper, and the cypress boat followed, not chasing, just maintaining a distance, always visible in my peripheral vision, always there. The water got thicker. I could actually feel the resistance against the hull now, like we were moving through something more substantial than water. The olive green had deepened to something almost black. How much longer until we head back? One of the guys, Dan, was checking his watch. We're pushing 45 minutes. Just a bit further, I heard myself say. The real magic happens right at dusk, but I didn't believe it. And something in my tone must have revealed that doubt because Sarah stepped up to the helm. Marcus, are you sure you know where we are? That question, that simple, direct question, is what broke the spell. Am I sure? No, I wasn't sure. I hadn't been sure for the last 15 minutes. And I'd been lying about it. I looked back at where the cypress boat had been. It was gone. I don't mean I looked away and it disappeared. I looked directly at the spot where it had been floating, when it simply wasn't there. The water was empty, smooth, like nothing had ever disturbed it. We need to go back, I said, and this time my voice was steady, clear, certain. The light's fading too fast. I spun the wheel to the right. A sharp turn, too sharp maybe. The boat tilted slightly and one of the female tourists grabbed the railing, but as we turned, I could see it again. The cypress boat, behind us now, still maintaining distance, still keeping pace. And I understood something then. We weren't lost. The cypress boat wasn't lost. There was no lost here. This was intentional. This was a route. The question was, what happened at the end of it? 15 minutes later, we were back at the dock. I was shaking by then, not visibly, but inside. Everything inside me was vibrating at a frequency just below conscious awareness. The tourists didn't notice. They were too busy talking about the blood moon, already on their phones. Posting photos, checking the time for their dinner reservations back at their hotel. They were fine. They'd never seen the cypress boat, never heard the voice in their bones. That was just for me. Sarah lingered as the others filed off. That was intense at the end, she said. You looked genuinely frightened. Just wanted to get you all back safe, I said. Water can be unpredictable. You've done this 1,000 times, though, right? I didn't answer, just tied off the boat, made sure the lines were secure. Did all the mechanical tasks that kept my hands busy and my mind from fully processing what had happened. After they left, I sat in the dockhouse. Just sat there in the dark. The old woman who'd warned me came back out. She had a cup of coffee. Drink, she said. You look like you've seen something. I took the coffee. That man, in the cypress boat. Who is he? She sat down across from me. Didn't speak for a long moment. There are places in the bayou that aren't on any map, she finally said. Places that exist in a specific way. people who exist in a specific way. For most folks, the bayou stays regular, normal, but sometimes there are those who take a wrong turn. I know where I was going, I said defensively. I've done this route hundreds of times. You turned left where you should have turned right, the old woman said. Just slightly, just a degree or two. But in the bayou, a degree or two can mean everything. I didn't turn the wrong way. I know my routes. You did. You know you did. That's why you were scared. I wanted to argue. But she was right. I could feel it. That moment when I decided to turn back. I'd made a choice that was wrong, not wrong by accident, but wrong in a deeper sense. Will they come back? I asked. The tourists? The boat? The man? She looked down at her hands. That depends. Depends on what? On whether you take another wrong turn. She paused then, took a slow sip of her own coffee. The dockhouse was quiet except for the sound of water lapping against the wooden posts. The blood moon was visible through the window now, that bruised, impossible red. Almost hypnotic if you stared at it too long. His name was Samuel Leclerc, she continued. He was a guide, like you. Died about 60 years ago. Well, that's what people said died, but I think the truth is more complicated. What do you mean? Same as you. But he didn't turn back. He kept going deeper and deeper into the bayou until he reached a place that shouldn't exist. And when he did, something happened to him. He changed. The water changed him. I didn't want to believe it, but part of me had already accepted it. The moment I saw that cypress boat, the moment I heard that voice. How do you know all this? I asked. Because I was on that tour, the old woman said. 60 years ago. I was just a girl then, 18 years old. Beautiful, I thought, ready for adventure. Samuel was our guide, and he was, well, he had the kind of charm that makes young girls do foolish things. She looked at me directly then, and I saw something in her eyes. Sadness, recognition, memory. We took a wrong turn that night, she said, and Samuel tried to bring us back. But the cypress boat was already there. The man with the black eyes was already watching, and Samuel made a choice. What choice? He got in the boat, took the wrong turn all the way to the end, and that's the last I ever saw of him. But you made it back. I ran, she said simply. While everyone was distracted, watching the blood moon, I jumped out and swam, made it to a piece of solid land. Eventually found my way back to civilization. Took me 3 hours. But everyone else, all the other tourists on that boat, they just kept drifting. Kept following Samuel deeper and deeper. That's impossible, I said, but my voice was hollow, because I knew it wasn't. The bayou has its own rules, the old woman said, and the deep roots, they're always hungry for new guides. They always need someone to lead people deeper. I left the dockhouse before she could say anything else. Drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The blood moon followed me all the way back to my apartment. I could see it in my rearview mirror, that impossible red color. Like it was bleeding onto the night sky. I didn't work for 2 weeks after that night, called in, said I was sick. Wasn't entirely a lie. Something was wrong with me. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and remember the feeling of that voice in my chest, the way the water had felt thick and wrong. The olive green hue that shouldn't exist in nature. I researched, found old stories, folklore about the bayou. Most of it was garbage, tourist trap stuff, but there were some references, scattered through local history forums and old books about Louisiana, to something called the deep roots, paths through the bayou that weren't quite the same as regular routes, places where the rules worked differently. I found a newspaper article from 1965, Bayou Tragedy, tour group vanishes without a trace. 8 people were reported missing. The guide, Samuel Leclerc, was never found. The search was called off after a week when rescuers reported feeling disoriented, lost. Like the bayou itself didn't want them searching. There were other articles too. 1952, 1952, 1950T, 1993, 2004. Different dates, different people, but always the same pattern. A tour, a wrong turn, a guide who never came back, and occasionally, one survivor. Someone who made it out, someone who carried the story. Most people didn't notice. Took a wrong turn, realized it, corrected course. No harm, no foul. But some people stayed on the deep route. Didn't realize they were lost until it was too late. And the thing guiding them, the man in the cypress boat, he was the bayou's way of making sure the route stayed populated. Making sure there was always someone to lead the next batch of lost souls deeper. Samuel Leclerc had been the guide before this one. And before Samuel there had been others, going back decades, maybe centuries. I don't know if this is true. I'm telling you what I believe. What I've pieced together from fragments and fear and late-night research that made my eyes burn and my skin crawl. 2 weeks later I went back to work. The first tour was smooth, normal, same tourists, same route. Everything felt right. I kept my heading precise. Didn't let my attention waver for even a second. But the second tour, it was just me and one passenger, a woman named Catherine. She was quiet, didn't ask many questions, just wanted to be on the water, experience the bayou. She was from somewhere in the Midwest. Ohio, I think, had that accent. That directness that people from the middle of the country have. About 30 minutes in, I realized something. I had no idea where I was, not like before. This was deeper, more complete. More complete. I could feel myself drifting into that state where the landmarks stopped making sense and the water took on that olive-green hue. The blood moon was rising again, not as intense as before, but I could feel it, that pull, that subtle manipulation of my senses, and I could see him. The man in the cypress boat. Rising from the water behind a distant cluster of cypress trees, he was just sitting there, watching, waiting. Catherine didn't notice, but she would. In a moment, she'd turn and see him, and then what? Would she jump out? Would she try to swim? Or would she accept it the way Samuel had accepted it 60 years ago? I pulled the boat hard to the right, a mistake, a deliberate one, the kind that would ground us on a sandbar if I timed it wrong, but I timed it right. The boat lurched. Catherine grabbed for the railing. "What's happening?" she cried. "Engine trouble," I lied. "Shallow water. We're going back." I powered down, then up again, freed us from whatever was holding us, started heading back toward the dock, and in my mirror I could see the cypress boat turning, moving back into the deeper bayou. Disappearing into the darkness like it had never been there. Catherine was fine. The tour ended. She even gave me a good review on her phone. But I understood something now. The cypress boat wasn't trying to trap me. It was offering me a choice every time I took the wrong turn. Or almost took the wrong turn. It appeared. It was offering me the deep route, a path that led somewhere else, somewhere deeper. And every time I chose wrong, it would come again, keep offering, keep waiting. A week later, I tried something different. I drove out to the bayou on my own time. No tour scheduled, just me and the water and the cypress trees. It was midday, bright sun, no blood moon. I wanted to find the old woman. She was sitting on the dock like she knew I'd come. "I need to know everything," I told her, "about the routes, about what happens if you don't turn back." She didn't invite me to sit, just looked at the water. "Samuel reached a place beneath the bayou," she said, "a place where the water doesn't move, where the air doesn't change, where time works differently. And the man in the cypress boat, he was already there, waiting. Waiting for what? For someone to take his place, someone to be the guide, someone to bring the lost souls deeper and deeper. And Samuel? What happened to him? He became something else," she said, "something between the bayou and the guide. He started bringing tours down there intentionally, leading them to the deep roots. And every person he brought, they changed too. They became part of it." "How many people are down there?" I asked. The question felt too big. Like it contained a darkness I couldn't comprehend. She turned to look at me finally. "Does it matter?" "The question isn't how many. The question is whether you're going to be next." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the cypress boat, the black eyes, the voice in my chest, and I kept thinking about something else, something the old woman had said. Samuel had been a guide, and then he wasn't. He'd transformed into something else, something that guided people deeper, and now the cypress boat was offering me the same choice. 3 nights later, I was piloting a tour when it happened again. The water changed, the landmarks got confused, the blood moon was rising. But this time, I didn't fight it. I let the boat drift deeper. I kept my course steady. I didn't try to turn back. My passengers, a couple from Texas and their teenage son, they were taking photos. They had no idea what was happening, and the cypress boat emerged from the darkness ahead. This time, I could see inside it clearly. There was Samuel, or what used to be Samuel. He had skin like olive-green water, eyes like the deep bayou, and he was smiling. He tilted his head, looked at me, and I heard his voice. Not in my chest this time, but directly in my mind. "Come home, brother. There's room for another guide, room for another keeper of the deep roots. All you have to do is take one more wrong turn." My hands moved toward the wheel. My body wanted to comply, but then I saw my passengers, the fear in their eyes. They could see the cypress boat now, see Samuel. See what was waiting for them if I didn't choose correctly. I jerked the wheel hard to the left. The boat spun. Water splashed. My passengers screamed, and I opened the throttle to full. We didn't look back, didn't ask questions, just flew through that bayou like hell itself was chasing us. And maybe it was. We made it back to the dock in 12 minutes. Should have taken 40. The laws of physics didn't apply in that moment. My passengers ran, didn't even wait for their money back. They just ran toward the city, toward civilization, toward the normal world. The old woman was waiting for me at the dock again. She looked sad. "You could have ended it," she said. "If you'd taken the deep turn, you could have become the new guide, and Samuel could have finally rested." "I'm not going to condemn someone else to this," I said. Then you're going to condemn yourself, she replied. The cypress boat will keep coming, it will keep offering, and one day you're going to be tired, one day you're going to want to rest, and you'll take that wrong turn. I haven't worked since that night. That was 3 weeks ago. I've been sitting in my apartment, watching the days change, watching the moon rise each night, and every night at a certain hour I feel it, that pull, that voice. Come home, brother, take one more wrong turn, and this, join us in the deep. Last night I made a decision. Tonight I'm going back out on the bayou one last time, but I'm not running, and I'm not taking passengers. I'm going to find the deep roots, I'm going to find Samuel, and I'm going to find out what lies at the very bottom of that dark water. Because here's what I've realized. The old woman said I could end it if I became the guide. What she didn't say is that maybe I could end it another way. Maybe if I go deep enough. Maybe if I reach the place where Samuel made his choice. Maybe I can reverse it. Maybe I can set him free. And when I do, maybe the cypress boat will finally stop calling. Maybe the deep roots will close. Maybe no one else will have to make this choice. Or maybe I'm just rationalizing my own descent into madness. Maybe I'm already on the deep roots. Maybe I took that wrong turn weeks ago and I've been drifting ever since. Maybe right now you're listening to a guide who's already been transformed, a guide who's already beneath the bayou, a guide who's already black-eyed and impossible. Maybe I'm the new cypress boat. And maybe you're listening to this story because you're about to take a wrong turn. Maybe you're about to need a guide. The blood moon is rising tonight. Can you see it? Can you feel it pulling at something deep inside your chest? Here's what I haven't told you. I'm not really Marcus anymore. By the time you heard this story, I was already gone. I'm writing this from the deep place, the place beneath the bayou, and I'm writing it because someone needs to understand what's happening. Someone needs to prepare. Because tonight, somewhere in Louisiana, a tour guide is going to feel the water change. A guide is going to realize they're lost. A guide is going to see a cypress boat emerging from the darkness, and that guide is going to have to choose, turn back, or keep going. And when they choose to keep going, when they finally surrender, the cypress boat will need a new passenger to ferry. The cypress boat will need a new guide, and the old woman at the dock will be there to warn someone else. The cycle will continue. It always does. Comment below. Are you scared of water? Have you ever felt lost somewhere you shouldn't be lost? Have you ever heard a voice that wasn't really there? Better yet, are you a tour guide? Are you someone who takes people through dark places? If so, be careful. Be very, very careful. Because the deep roots are always hiring, and they're patient, so patient. Subscribe if you dare. Because the real story isn't over, it's only just beginning. And Marcus, if you're reading these comments, if you're still somehow part of the waking world, please, tell us where you are. Tell us if you made it. Tell us if you're still human. Though honestly, I'm not sure any of us are anymore.